welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. And today from Frankfurt, if I'm not mistaken, is our distinguished guest, Lieutenant General, retired from the US Army, Ben Hodges. He served as a commanding officer at the US Army Europe. He fought in the wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq. He is a specialist in logistics, and we know him as a person who shares his valuable insights on what is going on in Ukraine, in the war of Russian invasion on Ukraine, and what is going on there. Thank you so much for having joined us, sir.
Thank you for the privilege.
My first question for you is of a very short-term character, or maybe it's long-term. What has happened with this Wagner Mutiny, which allegedly had happened during the weekend and has ended as abruptly as it started, or did it not?
Well, of course, there's a lot we don't know, but it has revealed how weak Vladimir Putin really is. I mean, he looks in his actions and inactions like an old, should have retired former KGB guy. I mean, he does not look like the strong leader of the Russian people, the Russian Federation, which is the image he had always tried to project. And I think that will embolden others in his opposition who may think about either breaking away or taking power. I think he cannot trust any of his officers anymore, which also means we should evaluate, or we should reevaluate how we view him as the leader of the Russian Federation when we're talking about potential nuclear escalation. I think it's even less likely that they would use a nuclear weapon now because he appears to be so weak and not in full control of all of his own officers. The last thing I would say is, as my friend James Scher has written, this what has happened this weekend is not the kind of thing that occurs in an army that believes it is on the way to victory. So this really highlights or will intensify self-doubt and loss of confidence inside Russian formations.
What has wondered me is the velocity with which the Wagner troops moved through Russia. They have taken Rostov-on-Don under their control. Rostov is the biggest city in the south of Russia, the headquarters of the Russian military operation in Ukraine since 8 years. They have taken it within a few hours in one night. Then they moved to Voronezh, like several hundred kilometers to the north. Their speed was as if they had no obstacle. The speed was limited just with the maximum speed of the trucks they were driving. It looks like they're going through a desert without like any obstacles. Is it how the Russian army cannot protect itself from any invasion?
This is a very, very interesting topic that I think we want to continue to better understand. First of all, the fact that they were able to take over the headquarters in Rostov tells me that they had sympathy or apathy on the part of the headquarters there. So they didn't have to fight their way in to take it over. And I suspect that planning for this and coordinations have been going on for at least a couple of months. So the fact that they took that over, the headquarters of the Southern Military District, should be very, very worrisome to the General Staff and the Ministry of Defense. Number two, this is either a total intelligence failure on the Russian side, that they were caught by surprise by this, or they're somehow complicit. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at. Now, British intelligence several months ago said that 95% of Russia's land forces are committed to Ukraine. So there's not like multiple divisions sitting throughout the depth of Russia. So there weren't forces available other than some attack helicopters that could stop this column once it got going. This surprised me also because I thought after the Free Russia Legion, you remember a few weeks ago, crossed into Belgorod and there were fighting in local villages there. One might have expected that the Russian side would have strengthened their forces along their own frontier to prevent that. Obviously, they didn't. So the speed, I think, is due in part to surprise, in part to there is nobody able to resist, or there was nobody really willing to resist. That should worry Putin more than anything. Is if he really believes he had support of 80% of the people, not one of them came out into the street, rallying to his aid. Not one.
Yeah, quite the opposite. We have seen the crowds in Rostov chanting Wagner, 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 and like celebrating the Wagner troop with the Wagner flag, which would be a very warning sign for me if I were Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
But coming back like from that development, which I personally believe has not ended yet, it can like provide us with some new development in the next weeks. If we come back to the main military development, which is ongoing like since over 14 months, the Russian full-scale invasion on Ukraine. What are your assessment of the current development? What is going on with the Ukrainian offensive? Has it started yet in full force, or should we wait for the involvement of the new fresh brigades, which Ukraine obviously has?
So I think the fact that only about 20% of Ukraine's brigades are actually in the fight now tells me that the main attack has not actually started. What they're doing is trying to create opportunity, vulnerability, find these weak spots, but doing it in such a way that the Russians can't move forces around because they don't know where the main attack is coming either. So this is actually not only part of developing the situation to find where you want to attack. It's fixed the Russians who are not able to shift and adjust. So there's a deception aspect to it as well. I think that the Ukrainians also have learned a lot in these first few weeks here about the quality of the defenses, getting the techniques down to practice going through minefields. They'll continue to destroy Russian logistics, continue to destroy Russian artillery, continue to destroy headquarters. And now you've added in the fact that Russia has lost the services of about 25,000 troops. If that's how many Wagner actually has,
That is how much? That is like about 20% of the Russian forces in Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken.
That's probably not too far off in terms of an estimate. 25,000 would be using Russian organizations. I mean, that's like 3 divisions worth of people. That's a lot of troops, and with a level of training and experience, and obviously, as we saw from all the video, a lot of heavy equipment. That's out of the fight, or it's not available at least for a period of time. Even if those soldiers are reintegrated somehow, I doubt many of them will want to be reintegrated. That they will walk. So on the Russian side, there's also, I think, there's got to be, in addition to the chaos in the headquarters, as people are trying to figure out who's loyal, who's not, what's going on. Soldiers in trenches are going to be wondering what's happening above them and behind them. And a soldier does not want to. You don't want to be killed or mutilated for a losing effort. I mean, if you begin to think, okay, obviously the end is close. I don't want to get killed here at the end, especially if we're losing. So I think their enthusiasm also is going to be less, perhaps, as a result of all of this.
If we look at the development of this Ukrainian offensive, if I understand you correct, and if I understand correct, like what I heard from other experts is that like currently the Ukrainians are trying like to test the Russian defense to make also Russians, as you said, believe that they don't know like where to attack, and then to find a weak spot and to storm into this weak spot. But we have seen in the first days of the Ukrainian offensive, we have seen like some heavy losses of the Ukrainian unit, which lost like like almost a dozen of Bradleys and 2 or 3 Leopards, and that was celebrated by the Russians as a huge victory over the Western military technology. But that was obviously the last huge victory of the Russians, and like it cannot be called, I guess, any like decisive victory or decisive success. What was the reason for that loss? And what did Ukrainians obviously learn from this loss? Because we have not seen any such photos or videos since then.
Yeah, I think there's a reason the Russians use those pictures over and over and over and over, because there aren't other losses.
Absolutely.
And so let's put this in perspective. Of when you're in the attack and you're going into obstacle belts, and the Russians, they should get credit for this. They demonstrated that they know how to integrate artillery into their obstacles. So I mean, this is exactly how you should do it. When the attacker has to stop to clear through a minefield, they're very vulnerable to artillery, and so the Russians had planned artillery targets right right in front of their obstacles. That's good. I mean, that's how you do it. The the What did the Ukrainians learn from this is, okay, we have to make sure continue to go after Russian artillery so they can't target us while we're having to clear the minefields. But I don't know exactly what happened inside that specific um, uh, unit. What happened there? Was it a mistake, or this is just the way it is? But we're talking about 0.001% of the amount of armored vehicles that Ukrainians have, and I think people may have made way too much out of it. And some of those vehicles were recovered so they could be repaired and used again. That's an important aspect of this. We practice recovering vehicles that have been damaged so that you can repair them and get them back into the fight. So I don't think these vehicles, all of them, were totally destroyed.
And what we know, like from the Ukrainians, it was, if I'm not mistaken, was 47th Motorized Brigade. They claimed that almost everyone from these vehicles had survived and was not heavily injured. So it is still like proves the quality of the Western equipment. But what we see now from the statistics that is being provided by the Ukrainian General Chief of Staff, that the Ukrainians destroy a lot of Russian artillery systems. Is it something what resonates with your estimates that the Ukrainians want to shut down the Russian artillery so it does not hit the Ukrainian troops, which are piercing the Russian defense?
Yeah, the only advantage that the Russians have overall is mass numbers of infantry and mass artillery. And so the way you neutralize that advantage is by going after artillery ammunition, and headquarters. And of course, that's what you need long range precision weapons for, is to be able to hit especially the headquarters and especially the ammunition for the artillery. When you take away the eyes and you take away the logistics, then the only advantages that the Russians have been neutralized. And I think this is where the Ukrainians are putting a lot of their effort, is to destroy headquarters, logistics, and artillery. I think they're going about this exactly the right way.
Do Ukrainians have enough of long-range weapons? The talk of the American-produced long-range missiles lasts for the last like half a year, if not longer. The Germans still don't supply Ukraine with Taurus missiles. If I'm not mistaken, the only long-range missile the Ukrainians have is the British Storm Shadow.
So the quick answer is no, they do not have enough. This, and I don't understand why the U.S. administration has been reluctant or refused even to provide ATACMS or Gray Eagle drones or the ground launch small diameter bombs. I don't understand that. I hear excuses, but none of them are compelling. And I think it's because the administration has not been able to bring itself to say, we want Ukraine to win. If they say we want Ukraine to win, then all of these things can be provided. There are nonsense excuses about, well, we don't have enough ATACMS. That's not true at all. The manufacturer just exported a bunch of them sold a bunch to Poland and to Romania. So this is a matter of political will. Germany, U.S., other countries have capabilities that we should be providing, and if we did, not only would this help the offensive, it would also, more importantly, make Crimea untenable for Russian forces. The Black Sea Fleet would have to leave Sevastopol if they had ATACMS were starting to hit all the port facilities there in the harbor, or the air base at Saki, or the logistics hub at Zhankoy. This is what long range precision weapons would do for Ukraine.
Regarding the Black Sea Fleet, we have seen significant victories of the Ukrainian army over the Russian Black Sea early this war. The flagship Moskva has been destroyed. Attacks of naval drones. Then the Russian Black Sea Fleet was practically blocked in its harbors, and even like partly went to Novorossiysk, to the eastern harbor on the Black Sea, which was like incredible success of a land power Ukraine, which didn't have like a massive fleet over a country which is not like tier one on the world's naval ranking, but still has a stronger fleet than Ukraine has. What is the role of the Black Sea Fleet now? Like, is it like degraded to only the launch pads for caliber missiles?
That's about all that they can do right now, is launch long range missiles against fixed targets like apartment buildings, Odessa, and that sort of thing. They don't want to go anywhere near the Ukrainian coast, exactly for the reason you just laid out. They haven't done any amphibious operations. This was another mistake I made. I had just assumed that they would be able to do amphibious operations all up and down the Black Sea coast. They never did do it because I think they don't have the right culture. They hadn't trained to do that because it is difficult. And so now they really are just a seaborne platform for launching missiles. If it wasn't for the Black Sea Fleet there in Sevastopol, we wouldn't have to worry about grain exports either. I mean, this grain deal, why in the heck does Russia have any influence on how Ukraine exports its grain? It's because the Black Sea Fleet enables Russia to disrupt or stop grain ships from departing Odessa or Mykolaiv and taking the grain through the straits. So again, this is why it's important that Russia is not allowed to operate from Crimea, and they in any post-conflict settlement they should not be allowed to keep Crimea, because Ukraine will never be able to rebuild its economy as long as Russia is able to block all ocean-going traffic into Azov Sea or Odessa or Mykolaiv.
If we come now to the forecast section, and I understand that it is not welcomed to make like concrete prognosis about like what will go on like Tokmak direction or Melitopol direction, or I don't know, like Bakhmut, Avdiivka, etc. But strategically, what could be the ways for Ukraine to regain, to liberate their territories with the smallest losses possible and in the shortest time possible?
Isolate Crimea and make it untenable for Russian forces. I mean, Crimea is the decisive terrain. That Bakhmut was important only because Russians were willing to spend a lot of lives there. From a strategic standpoint, obviously it's important because there were 70,000 people that used to live there and it's Ukrainian sovereign territory. But from a cold strategic sense, Crimea is what is decisive. If Ukraine is able to liberate Crimea, then this whole thing is over. So you start that liberation by isolating it, and I think that's one of the objectives of the counteroffensive is to isolate, to cut the so-called land bridge that runs from Rostov all the way down through Mariupol and Melitopol, isolate it, bring up more HIMARS and other systems that can reach targets inside Crimea and make it untenable. And then at some point, you're in a position where you can actually enter the peninsula. And I think this could all happen very fast if the U.S. were to provide more long-range systems. In the absence of that, it's going to take more time, but there's no doubt in my mind that Ukraine has the ability to liberate Crimea, and I think that's what they'll do. After that, there will not be much enthusiasm on the Russian side for continuing to hang on to Donetsk or Luhansk or any of the other occupied territories.
If we imagine that the Ukrainians have managed to pierce through the Russian defense lines, what they are obviously doing right now, and come to the northern shore of the Sea of Azov, like somewhere near Berdyansk, let me say. So they cut the land bridge from the Russian sovereign territory via Ukraine occupied territory to Russia occupied Crimea. Will the Russians try to defend Crimea, or will they take another goodwill gesture and just pull the troops back before the Ukrainians destroy the Kerch bridge and trap them in Crimea?
I think that's an interesting question. Of course, I don't know what the Ukrainians are going to do, but I could see them leaving the Kerch bridge up as a way for the Russians to leave. I mean, that's what they want, to leave.
That is exactly what they did with Antonovsky Bridge in Kherson.
Yeah, and this is a different case. I think in this case, if they leave Crimea, then Ukraine's able to reoccupy Crimea, which, as I say, would be the decisive terrain of this conflict. I mean, that would basically end any hope that Russia has of ultimately winning or getting a favorable outcome. Obviously, Ukrainian forces will want to secure the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as quickly as they can to prevent a Russian created catastrophe. I think that Vladimir Putin has the power as an autocrat to change the narrative immediately. I mean, he could even take this catastrophic weekend he just went through, change the narrative, saying we have to protect the motherland and bring everybody back. And I don't think you would see huge demonstrations in the streets complaining about it. I think people would say, okay, well, the great leader changed the narrative. There's a new thing we've got to deal with now. So in effect, he could even turn it to his advantage to extract himself out of this this disaster that he created for himself.
But when we talk about this development of the Russian invasion, like we have seen like several stages of this invasion. We have seen like the mass invasion the first days with columns, tank columns, and Rosgvardia interior ministry columns entering Ukraine almost without any protection, like hoping that the Ukrainian army will just dissolve, right, and they will take Kiev. These columns have been destroyed mostly by the Ukrainians. Then we had like the development on the eastern part of Ukraine with like heavy artillery fights, with Russians spending a lot of ammunition, which was like responded by the Ukrainians with HIMARS strikes against the ammunition depots. And now we see the next stage, like with the Ukrainians penetrating the defense lines, which have been created by the Russians since at least a year in the region. So they had enough time to do it. What can we say about the change of the tactics and how the Russians adapted to the Ukrainian tactics? Did they adapt?
So what you've done is very nicely describe how this war has changed in its character and in its objectives from the original reason Russia, the false narrative that they created to justify the full-scale invasion, to now they're trying to avoid disaster and hang on to something to wait for the West to lose interest and the will to continue supporting Ukraine. I think what's happened over the weekend has exposed how fragile the power structure is there, and what a calamity is Russia's decision to even start this war. So, at the tactical level, the Russians have done what they always did. They use mass. They're willing to spend thousands of lives because they don't care about those lives. They care about blunt force. At the same time, killing innocent Ukrainians every week with precision weapons, flying into apartment buildings and shopping centers. So it's a war of attrition. But I don't see this lasting a lot longer. I mean, I was always confident that Ukraine was going to win. And if the U.S. provides what they need, Crimea could even be liberated by the end of this summer. Now, after seeing how weak the leadership is, and imagining what's going through the minds of Russian soldiers who are wondering what's going on above them and behind them, they seem even more vulnerable to a collapse. And so I hope that we, the West, will accelerate delivery to Ukraine of what they need so that they can get this done.
If we look at the Russian casualties, the Ukrainian numbers are now like slightly under 230,000, if I'm not mistaken. It is not clear if these numbers also include the wounded Russians, because like the Ukrainians just say the losses. When we listen to what Prigozhin said, justifying like his mutiny, he said like 1,000 a day, including wounded and deserted. That's like that is the number what the Ukrainians say when they say the Russian losses. I don't know like how much we should trust Prigozhin words, because he's a criminal and a liar. But anyway, like if we say like that the Russians lose 1,000, like 500 to 1,000 a day, with the cumulative losses, like killed, wounded, or deserted, the persons who they cannot use within the next like weeks or months.
Yeah.
How sustainable is the Russian army now with this 220 to 130,000 cumulative losses? Because Putin tries to tell us that he has like unlimited resources, which he obviously has not. But where is this border? Are we nearing this border? As you said, that most of Russian army is fighting in Ukraine, and Russia is practically left unprotected.
So a couple of things to unpack here. First of all, I am always skeptical about any numbers when you're talking about killed and wounded. I mean, it's human nature. It's the nature of war that there are going to be a lot of estimations going on. I destroyed the vehicle that normally carries 6 people, so I must have killed 6 people. And so that's how numbers, when there might only be 2 people inside a vehicle, for example. So that's how you can get inflation, or you have different people claiming to have destroyed and reporting that they destroyed a vehicle or an enemy assault. So I typically cut numbers in half. When I see reports, I just cut it in half. Even if we take half of what has been reported as killed and wounded of Russian forces, that is enormous, and I don't think it is sustainable. Not to mention, although people could be replaced more quickly than the good equipment that has been destroyed and lost or abandoned. Now, Russia does have a population that's about 3 times the size of Ukraine, but that's scattered all over the country. I don't think you could fill up a school bus with Russians who actually really want to be in Ukraine. And so this would be a gigantic political risk for the Russian side if they decided to do another mobilization, especially now after this past weekend. I think they would see a real problem. And so, and even if they did it, though, it would be many, many weeks before any troops show up that have even a modicum of training where they could make a difference. So I don't know where that line is, but I think that Russia cannot assume that they've got unlimited manpower and they can just keep feeding it in, because at some point, I think at some point the Russian army says that's enough and we're done.
If we are talking about like what goes next, we have, of course, like different scenarios, like up to like the catastrophic scenario for Putin and Russia, or for Putin and Russian Federation, like losing the war, many like mutinies, uprisings, secessions, like collapse of Russia, up to some Putin's victory scenario with like Russia preserves control over certain territories of Ukraine or pulls back all the forces and like contains the territory which is sovereign Russian territory, like leaves Crimea, leaves Donbass, but controls all the territories which legally belong to Russia. In that scenario, how realistic is it that Russia just continues to shell Ukraine with missiles? Because for that, you don't need army, you don't need people who risk their lives. The Russians can theoretically produce like 30, 50 calibers a month, and the old missiles, and they can just shoot them from the Caspian Sea and from the Tupolev 95 bombers.
Well, look, if you're talking about the Russians continuing to do this after Ukraine has ejected Russian forces from Ukraine, then I think you'll see the West being more willing to allow or enable Ukraine to launch strikes against bases inside Russia. Of course, Ukraine can do that on their own anyway. And I think that they've seen how weak Russia is, its inability to defend its own borders.
So if I may interrupt you, sir, do I understand you correctly that the reason why the West doesn't encourage or doesn't allow to use, doesn't encourage Ukraine, doesn't allow Ukraine to use the Western provided weapons to strike the Russian territory is because our political leadership is still not sure if Ukraine will liberate all the territories so military prevail over Russia?
I think that's probably part of the calculation, but the bigger part, that what I believe, based on what I hear, is that the administration and probably some other European governments are concerned that this would be seen as too escalatory, and that Russia might, use a nuclear weapon of some sort if the motherland is being attacked. I think this is a overestimation. I don't think it's likely at all, and I think that we continue to deter ourselves. We should help Ukraine defend itself, as it's entitled to under the UN Charter, against these attacks that are killing innocent Ukrainian civilians that are coming from Russian bases. So Ukraine can do that with what they have. I think we should not be hindering them, because by doing so, we are in effect giving Russia safe haven to do what they're doing.
But back to this like question, what will happen if Russia pulls back, says what ours is ours, and then they will continue to hit Ukraine with long-range missiles? So you think that this scenario will not be able to last for long because Ukraine will have full commitment by the West to stop this?
I think so. I don't think that the Russians. I don't think. I think we've learned a lot, and are going to learn a lot more about what's going on inside Russia because of what was revealed this weekend. And so the willingness to just keep doing things that only wreck Russia's economy and further isolate them from the rest of the world, um, I think that the appetite for doing that is not endless, nor is it widely shared by a lot of other people who realize that Putin is weak, but yet they are unable to get back to their normal life, to business, they're losing a lot, and so I just don't see that the Kremlin can continue doing what it's doing for as long as it wants.
Do you think that what has happened in Russia this weekend with the alleged mutiny of Yevgeny Prigozhin and his Wagner troop, that is a game changer for the coming Vilnius NATO summit?
I think the West, all of our leaders are going to have to recalculate, reassess how they look at Putin, what his power, his ability to do things. I think now many people will come to the conclusion that Putin cannot trust many of his officers, which means it's less likely that he could direct the use of a nuclear weapon or some other things. Um, and so I think they're going to see him in a weaker stance. Not that he's not dangerous anymore, but they'll see him through a different lens. And so I do think that this will change some calculations. Now, most of what NATO plans to do at Vilnius will continue, I think, as planned. Hopefully, though, this will also increase the pressure, especially on the U.S. administration, to uh, call for Ukrainian membership in NATO, to issue a very clear, concrete plan for Ukraine to join the alliance. I think that would really, now more than ever, the case could be made that not only would this not be escalatory, Russia can't do anything about it, but it also um, would improve security and stability for Europe by having Ukraine, which is about to be the best army on the continent and getting stronger every week. Having them inside NATO actually would, in a way, um, add stability, prevent them from continuing to hammer Russia. So it'll have a de-escalatory effect versus an escalatory effect.
Exactly, like having Ukraine on board inside of the NATO, while Russia is like sliding into some sort of mutinies, a chain of mutinies, unrest, etc., will actually increase the NATO security and will also provide Ukraine with some breaks, like from sending some Russia volunteer corps to Belgorod or to Kursk, and to see what happens if the Russian citizens with Ukrainian provide weapons, like go to the Russian sovereign territory. But do you think, like coming back to this aftermath of the Wagner Mutiny, do we expect now that Vladimir Putin will start to purge his own military, like looking for traitors?
Yeah, I'm sure that there will be some purges going on if he feels he's strong enough to be able to do it, because some officers will have exposed themselves uh, by not being loyal enough or fast enough to put a stop to this. And so I could imagine that we could see purges happening um, unless he senses that he's not strong enough to be able to do a purge. That if he started it and then you would have another mutiny. So I suspect there will be those kinds of calculations going on.
But if we imagine that he like moves away or dismisses Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, and Gerasimov, the head of the General Chief of Staff, and also the commander of the Russian military group in Ukraine, will it mean that the Russian army will get like humiliated and not willing anymore to fight, or quite the opposite? Like new capable officers can go up. Like after Shoigu, who is clearly not the best defense minister, after Shoigu has been replaced by somebody who is smarter.
It could be. I mean, it's actually good for Ukrainians that Shoigu and Gerasimov stay in post. Um, I don't know. I don't know enough about who else is out there beyond Surovikin and a couple of guys like that. If they were to move up to take over these posts, but fixing Russia's problems are not just a matter of human resource changes of replacing commanders. I mean, the systemic failures that they have, the lack of confidence and trust in each other, um, the fact that most Russian soldiers know that they are cannon fodder. I mean, that does not inspire people to really want to fight. And so it's going to take, honestly, for Russia to really change, it's going to take a cataclysmic event, meaning get crushed on the battlefield, go back and then take a look. All right, how do we fix all these problems in order to be able to defend our country? And that has to start at the top. There's so much corruption out there that I think people just don't. It's a gigantic mafia organization, and I don't think people trust each other.
If I may ask you last question, because we have already went over the time we have discussed, like half an hour. What are your predictions for the next like half a year of this war? You said before that with weapons, Ukraine could have liberated Crimea this summer. Obviously, Ukraine will not get all the weapons it needs. So, what are the next steps? What are the crucial points of this development?
If, and this is the big if the United States makes a decision, we want Ukraine to win, and to seriously to win, and then we provide those things that are needed: long-range precision weapons, F-16s, or other, those tight quality aircraft. Then this thing could be over this year. I mean, literally, it could be over this year. Crimea could be liberated by the end of summer. If we don't, if we continue doing the incremental decision making we're doing, Ukraine still wins, but it'll cost a lot more in terms of lives lost, and it'll take longer. So the speed and the cost, I think, really comes down to the U.S. administration. I think a lot of estimates are being re-examined now in light of what happened over this past weekend. And hopefully this leads to decisions that will accelerate delivery of what Ukraine needs. I have to think that Ukrainians are thrilled with what has happened, because it clearly shows real weakness on the other side, and I anticipate that they will exploit that. That doesn't mean there's not going to be a lot of hard fighting. Of course there is, but I think there is potential for this war to take a different shape in the next few weeks.
So all eyes on Ukraine for the next 4 or 5 weeks, and then we hope that Ukraine will get new weapons and will liberate its territories until the end of summer, maybe until the end of year. Then we'll look what will happen to Russia after that, and how Ukraine can guarantee its safety and security on a longer run, having uncomfortable neighbor in north and east. Thank you so much. It was Ben Hodges, Lieutenant General, retired from the U.S. Army, a former commanding officer in the U.S. Army Europe, an officer who fought his wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and he shared his experiences, and his analysis with us. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you, sir, for your amazing insights.
Thanks very much for the privilege and opportunity you gave me, Sergey.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a great day, and don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe, and see each other on the next stunning interviews. Thank you, and have a great day.